Welcome back to the Rearing in It Formula One podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the Japanese Grand Prix. I'm your host this week, Kieran Ledwell, joined by my sister,
Ellie Ledwell,
and our fellow co-host,
Harry McKay.
So, before we even jump into the race, arguably the most dramatic thing for the whole weekend, Yuki and Liam Lawson swapping seats from the Red Bull to the RB and vice versa. What are your initial thoughts on that? I don't think it was a surprise to many people, but are you surprised at how brutal Red Bull were with their decision making?
Yeah. I mean, the speed at which this has happened. I mean, going into the season, I think everyone knew that, you know, the Red Bull second seat is brutal, and Lawson was going to have a lot to do to keep up with Max. But yeah, I mean, obviously he didn't have a good start to the season. We've been talking about how his time is numbered, his days are numbered. But 2 races, I mean, they've spun it in quite a good way, I think. Sort of saying, you know, it's for his own good, and, you know, they've got to protect the driver, and I think that's limited the impact a little bit. But, you know, whatever way you look at it, it's brutal, and it's got to be harsh for Lawson.
I think the only saving the point is the fact that he does still have a seat in Formula One. It's not as though he's been completely kicked out. They've not booted him out. They've just, I know it's still a demotion, but it is at least maybe they still have a bit of faith in him. I don't know. It must be really hard to come and turn up and do your job when there's this huge story hanging over you. You've not been in Formula One particularly long. You're young.
Yeah.
It must be quite isolating. I know they travel with their own, you know, they'll have an assistant or a physio or whatever, but it's still, you're not with your friends and family to kind of support you through it. You're on your own in a foreign country, and you're having to kind of put on a brave face in front of hundreds of thousands of people and millions of people at home. So it must have been a really, really difficult weekend for him.
Yeah. 1 minute Max Verstappen's your teammate, the next you're in the Visa Cash App RB TikToks that are doing pretty well, you know. To put on a brave face whilst Isaac Hajar's lip syncing at you must be quite tough.
And I think everyone's...
I've been really enjoying it.
People are looking at this the wrong way, right? He had 2 weekends where he's at the back of the grid, and now all of a sudden he's had a weekend where, you know, it wasn't the best weekend, but he's not been right at the back, so arguably this is his best weekend so far. So, I mean, you know,
he had his best result.
Look at the bright side, yeah,
it's his best result. That's a great.
He's
point.
on an upward trajectory.
Well, moving on more towards qualifying, then obviously he did actually then out qualify Yuki Tsunoda. You know, obviously Tsunoda might take a bit of getting used to the car. You would hope not, almost, having been in the RB setup for so long, but maybe it really is showing that this Red Bull car this year is really tough to drive if your name isn't Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I think we saw that in the other races against Lawson. You know, I think the Red Bull's tougher. We saw it with Checo last year as well, but it wasn't the best start. But I don't think anybody was expecting him to hit the ground running in the same way that Lawson wasn't. But it puts him in a difficult spot. You know, in 2 races' time, if Tsunoda's not having a great time, what do? They've only got one more driver they can swap in.
Exactly.
I think
at what point do they blame the car?
The saving grace, I think, is that up to that point in the weekend, Tsunoda was putting in some good lap times. I mean, he wasn't. I'm not going to say keeping pace with Max, but the gap wasn't as big as it had been with Lawson, and I think his performance in qualifying was maybe more down to a bad lap rather than consistent bad laps, which, you know, at the end of the day, the result was Lawson P14, Tsunoda P15, but over a season, if he can put it together for laps, you know, at least he's got the potential to do it, I think. So
and in Q3, Tsunoda wasn't miles behind. He was only, I think, 2/10 behind Verstappen, which is quite a big gap for a teammate, but it's not a big gap for Max. So I think, in the first part of qualifying, as you say, he was where you'd expect him to be, but he just ended up not managing to get through. So
it's an interesting backdrop to that drama is that after his initial disappointment on his first race weekend, Isaac Hadjar is actually performing quite well in the last 2 races since then. Qualifying in P7 into Q3. You know, you never know if Yuki doesn't pull his socks up. We might have a third swap in there. It might be a third driver in that second Red Bull seat. You never know. I wouldn't put it past Red Bull being willing to do it.
I've been really impressed with Hadja. I think he's obviously one of the younger ones, and one of the, you know, there was several rookies this year that already had Grand Prix experience. So for Hadja and Antonelli, I think being the younger ones and the least experienced, I think that they've both shown a good side of themselves. I think that they're the two that have impressed me the most, the two rookies. So especially Hadja, I think he's doing really well. So
yeah, exactly. Speaking of rookies doing well as well, Ollie Beerman, P10 in the Haas. Another good result there. It does look like the crop of rookies, there are a few that are starting to maybe pull away from the others. You know, it's the first year in a while we've had this many rookies, and I think the cream's starting to rise to the top slowly as the weeks go by, if you agree with me. Beerman's doing well, Antonelli's doing well, Hadjar's doing well, and then maybe the other two are struggling a little bit, is a nice way of putting it.
But then with Bortoletto, he's not necessarily struggling, he's just in a bad car. His times to Hulkenberg are not particularly bad, it's just they're not in a car that's... I know that Hulkenberg did score, you know, he's already scored more points this season than they did in the entirety of last season. But it's not really a car that's going to be particularly
often, is it? Yeah.
Fighty, should we say, you know.
Yeah, well, I guess you could compare it in a way to the early part of George Russell's career, where no one denied he was a talented driver, but you compare it to the rookies that he was alongside in Lando Norris and Alex Albon. He was never going to be near them qualifying wise just because of the car that he was in. But yeah, good point. Stroll as well. Another disaster class from Lance Stroll. The perennial rookie he always feels like. To me, the fact he's in his late 20s, or I don't even know how old he is, he must be like nearly 30 something now. It's bizarre to me because in my mind, the way he drives, the way he acts, he's forever a rookie.
He's been in the sport like 7 odd years now, but he definitely has that feel. Yeah, he definitely has the feel of being a rookie, and he was one of the youngest drivers in the sport. Obviously, he was brought in with his father's financial backing, but he's been in the sport a long time. He's grown up in the sport in some ways, but he definitely still has an inexperienced kind of vibe to him. He definitely, but maybe we're being harsh because, you know, his racing as his teammate is in his 40s, so maybe he seems a bit more immature because of that.
Lance is a weird one because he has moments where you think, you know, he's a half decent driver, and I think at times in his career it's like he's justified having, you know, had a place in Formula One, just not for, like Ellie said, 7 years. I mean, to stay around that long, normally you're, even if you're not in one of the faster cars, you prove you're a reliable talent, like a Hulkenberg, for example. You know, you can score points when they're available, and you keep the car on track. Lance he's not that level, and I think he will be there as long as he wants to, and his dad's putting up the money. But I mean,
I think Aston Martin
have been performance.
Very disappointing this year. You know, 2 seasons ago, we were talking about them
podiums
in a much higher regard. You know, so
it felt inevitable they were going to break into the quote unquote top 4. You know, they were going to make it into a top 5 or kick someone out, and it's just not materialized at all so far. I mean, maybe they're focusing on next year and the rule changes, but I think Aston Martin have been driving under the name Aston Martin for long enough now that you're right, it's a bit disappointing from where a few years ago you might have thought they'd be by now, especially at this point of the season.
But even in that season where they started really strongly, they massively tailed off towards the end. And that was the same season.
They played it really badly.
Let's not forget that season, McLaren, they started that season as the slowest team. They're now the reigning Constructors' Champions. And in that time, Aston Martin went from being like the 3rd fastest car to being one of the slower ones on the grid. So, yeah, they could have pushed on then. They could have progressed as McLaren did, but their trajectory has been in the complete opposite direction.
Exactly. Do you think having Lance Stroll in is a big hindrance to that? Because knowing that one half of your driver lineup is not there on merit, maybe it's hard to push in the right direction. Don't know.
I mean, it depends on his ability to feed back to the mechanics. I think if you've got a driver who's you may not be the fastest but can have really good feedback, then that's going to help a lot in development and almost may be worth it. And I haven't heard too much about his ability to do that. I think maybe I heard something where he's actually quite good at that, but that may have been some pro Stroll propaganda. I can't really remember.
Yeah,
Harry loves all
you
the
could have
Canadians.
a driver like that as a reserve driver, as opposed to being one of the thing of F1 is you only have two drivers.
Yeah,
there's only one more than one. Do you know what I mean? As silly as that sounds, like half of your lineup being there not on merit can't help.
Yeah.
But then the team wouldn't have the finances it has without him, so you have to look at it from both sides. I understand that he might not be there on merit, but they're
the money be there exactly.
There's so many more staff members at that team now because of the money, because of the financial backing. They're a much bigger side, so
that's a good point.
You've got to look at it from both sides.
Obviously, then Q3 pole position, back where he belongs, in my opinion. Max Verstappen on the top step once again. What a lap to get himself there ahead of those McLarens.
Yeah. Incredible.
Beautiful.
Honestly,
one of the best qualifying laps I've ever seen from him. Yeah,
it's classic Max as well. Like, lots of drama around Red Bull in the week. Like we've just mentioned with Yuki and Lawson. Which he was involved in as well. It's become, he's kind of made it clear in his own way that he's not happy with the decision, or at least with the instability within the team. But he has that ability, as the greats do, to shut that noise out and on a Saturday afternoon get that car exactly where he needs to get it into pole position. But yeah, I think one of the best laps we might see of the year, in my opinion.
He really, I mean, he was, I don't think anyone throughout that quali thought he's going to put it on pole.
No.
But that's what happens when you have, one of the greatest drivers ever. That, when they just put it together, it can top the equipment, Like, I know watching F1 sometimes and people talking about it, you think at the end of the day, the fastest car wins, but sometimes that's not the case, and this really was that. It separates you out into the next level. And Norris, I think we've talked about his chances of winning a championship and what maybe differs him from Max, and this really was a showing of it. You've got the fastest car, and yet you've lost out on skill, and I think that should be a little worrying in the team's mind for McLaren, because if that happens a lot, it could maybe ruin their chances, but we'll see.
I think the only thing with the McLaren is it looks as though when it's in its window, it operates incredibly well and it's incredibly fast. But when it's not quite happy, it is quite difficult to drive. And also, because we saw laps where Lando was, half a second down from Oscar and vice versa. And I think it's like when it's in the window, it's quicker than anything else, but getting it in the window is quite difficult, and it's something that maybe they both have struggled with a bit. So I think Max got absolutely everything out of his car, and I don't think either McLaren driver were able to do that in qualifying. That's just my opinion.
I think you're right. I think that's what happened.
Goes to
sorry, I was just going to say that's what happened, but I mean, on a track like Suzuka, especially where it is hard to overtake, I mean, if you're not going for the championship, you're not in the championship race, you can sort of afford to lose these kind of races. But if you are, it's not just adding another win to your collection. It's cementing. When you look back at the end of the season, you can point to specific races and say, that's where I won it. And I think it's a long season, but if the Red Bull does improve, they can wrangle that car into a better setup, and this could be one of those things where early on, not only has he minimalized point losses, he's keeping pace, he's capitalizing on every moment, and I think that is a worry for McLaren.
Yeah, Verstappen's now only like 1 point behind Norris. So
and that tells a very different picture to what we're seeing, isn't it? Like, you look at the scores alone, it's
Well, it's interesting, that kind of idea that, at least for the first half of the season, I think for Max it's about maximizing point. Obviously, it's about maximizing points for everyone. Don't get me wrong, but is maximizing those opportunities, getting those race wins when he can, and keeping the gap close enough that if Red Bull can develop that car, he then is he keeps himself within touching distance. Kind of like an inverse of last year, where obviously they started the year so strongly, and then in the second half of the year he was just trying to get as many points each week as possible to keep his lead healthy enough to win. So, one thing about Max is he's up for the challenge. No matter what car he's in, he's going to get every single second that he can out of it. That's for sure.
Do you think that after this weekend and the performance that he put in, do you think that he is the title favourite?
I wouldn't go that far, but I think he's definitely in the picture. I think I wouldn't go that far. I think at the end of the day, the fastest car has the best chance of winning. So that's got to be probably Norris with his experience, then Piastri, and I think Verstappen's a strong third favourite. But he knows how to win a championship, and that does count for a lot. So I mean, the argument can be made, and maybe you're going to make it, but I think still sort of I'd put him third.
Yeah, I think, well, we'll have to see, because maybe at the end of the year we look back and say, oh, do you remember that time that Verstappen won a race this year and McLaren ran away with the rest of it? We don't know. We're still very early into the season. But with his 1 day pace on a Saturday, his 1 lap pace, I saw something earlier. It's like, when you look at the tracks this year and the size of the cars now, it is actually quite hard to overtake. And qualifying, this week qualifying was absolutely crucial. It felt like we were at Monaco this week, and there are a few tracks coming up like that. So if he can nail it on a Saturday and drive the way we know he can, and hold off those McLarens, who knows? Maybe in 3 or 4 weeks' time, he's grabbed another couple of wins and it's still neck and neck. You just don't know at this stage of the season, I think.
Just to tangent a bit from that, I was thinking the other day about street circuits. Obviously, street circuits are more difficult to overtake, but there are circuits that are non-street circuits where it's difficult to overtake. But we used to have Monaco, Singapore, we'd have Abu Dhabi, we'd have Azerbaijan, and that was it for the season, right? We're now looking at 9, 10 next year. They're getting rid of the Spanish Grand Prix, moving to a street circuit in Madrid. There's talk of a new street circuit in Bangkok. There's so many more street circuits now that the Saturday becomes more important throughout the season. I know we used to have less races as well, but we would have 16 races and 4 street circuits, and that was, a quarter. And now we're having a third street circuits, or more than a third street circuits. So that percentage, it's a quite a big increase. So as you say, the cars
even
are
a track
as
like
well
Suzuka
now.
Even a track like Suzuka isn't a street circuit, but it is still quite hard to overtake. Even a circuit like Monza, people struggle because the lack of DRS, because everyone's running such low downforce setups. It is hard to get that advantage in the slipstream. Well, that's the
thing.
There's one chicane a lap to try and overtake, and
with Suzuka, there's only 1 DRS point.
And then even then, if the only way to overtake is DRS and not diving
DRS
into a
down
corner,
the straight, it's not exactly exciting.
Yeah. No, we want late braking, and we want
exactly.
Lunges. Nothing dangerous, but.
Do you think DRS is here to stay in F1? A little tangent, because I think at the time it was brought in as a stopgap measure to help with overtaking. But do you think the way the sport's evolved, it's a necessity now? Do you think we'll ever go to a point where it's not necessary? Because I think the idea of the ground force cars was that they would phase it out. But I think if you look at the last year or two of racing, you'd have seen a lot less without DRS as well. Do you think it's here to stay for at least the next 5-10 years at least?
Well, I don't know with the new regulations what it's going to be like, but for this current regulations that we have, it's so difficult to follow. I know that they tried to make it easier from, the 2020 cars.
Which did work for a bit, it seemed, but it seems to be getting worse again.
It seems to be going back now where the cars are really struggling to get out of the dirty air. You're looking at like 7 seconds behind. Yeah. So, you see drivers dropping down 2 or 3 seconds just so that they don't kill their tyres. So I think the issue with getting rid of DRS is that people just can't follow without it. You need to get past as quickly as possible, otherwise your tires are going to be ruined. So I hope that they are able to phase it out with the newer cars, or maybe have a smaller opening, or less of an advantage, but we'll see.
Not hopeful, but
so moving back onto the race itself a little bit then. Well, we kind of touched on the fact that qualifying is looking so important this year, because I think, the top 6 finish in the positions they started in. Not the most interesting race. When on the Sky commentary, Crofty's having to ad-lib a little bit. It's not the not been the most entertaining battle out on track. Does it worry you a bit that might be a trend through the season now, a lack of overtakes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem with the sport, isn't it? Because in theory, the end of this race with Max, Lando and Piastri all within, under 2 seconds within each other, sort of thing, constantly going into that DRS range, then falling out of it, going back into it. That should have been a nail-biting finish. We any one of those 3 could have won the race. And yet, I bet both of you, and I bet most of our listeners who watched and were paying attention to the end there, we're trying not to zone out, because I mean, you never really felt like any of them could win it. I mean, a little shout out to my dad, who is actually traveling in Japan right now. I'm quite jealous.
Oh, wow.
Was at the race. Was in Suzuka.
Wow.
Watched the race. So yeah, extremely jealous. My invite must have got lost in the post. But watching that live and seeing them go lap after lap, seeing them in person just fly past each other, you should have been biting your nails watching that. And yet all he could think about was, oh, come on, let's edge towards the exit so we can try and be front of the line to get the bus out of it, because
beat the traffic.
The excitement wasn't there, because overtaking was so hard that even when you can follow, it just couldn't happen. And I think, sure, that's not every track, but it is a problem. And I think long term with the sport, it puts people off. It stops people coming in and watching it. And I mean, maybe it's the cars being so big. Maybe you try and narrow them, but I don't know.
I think I'd like to be a bit more optimistic and say maybe it's the beginning of the season. People didn't want to take the risks, so maybe as we get closer towards the end of the season, in 15 races time, maybe we'll see a bit more action, if that was a bit more like, I've got to go for it.
Yeah, I mean, Norris would have dive bombed and tried to, but at the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, I think if you're second and you're a second behind him, you're gonna go for it if you can. You want to win the race. So yes, we would see more lunges, but then that's, like you said, Ellie, maybe bordering on the dangerous side, and that's not what we want. So
no.
I guess maybe at this point in the season, 18 points is better than none. So
true.
Yeah, but if you keep conceding,
7 points,
because that's a 7-point swing to Verstappen, you can't afford too many of those. I was going to say, on that idea of aggression from the drivers, McLaren's strategy, I don't really think they put themselves in the mix to actually try and win the race.
They were really poor.
They're clearly the three fastest cars on track, and if they're going to finish second and third, I think they would have been quite comfortable in that. Why not try something a bit different? If they box the same, they box Norris the same lap as Verstappen, on a track that's so hard to overtake. No attempt at an undercut or an overcut or anything really. I don't really know what the plan was.
So I think he said, we're playing with the cards that we've got. We've had Verstappen do a great quali. He's in first, but they've got, it's 2v1. They've got two drivers there.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a hard to overtake track. Yes, Max is in front of you. And yet the one card they had, two drivers against one, the opportunity to split the strategy, they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I just...
No,
exactly. The Ferraris don't have the pace. The Mercedes doesn't have the pace. That you can have that little bit of leeway where there's a little bit of gap between, the top three and the rest. And yet you've squandered it. Just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I agree. And if we can just talk about the pit incident, I think Norris could have very easily messed up his race by going into a wall or something, or taking out Verstappen and getting a penalty or something. It was dangerous. It was reckless, and I think he lost so much time from doing that. If he had just slipped him behind, he would have potentially been able to follow him a bit closer and get past him. But by going over the grass, corner, but he took so much speed off. He then, by the time they're, make your tires dirty, he lost time. He was then not in the DRS. He could have had a really good shot then, but he made the wrong decision. And I think, yes, it was a great race from Verstappen from start to finish, but there was also, I think, missed opportunities from Norris and from McLaren. And that's what we saw last year. And if we keep seeing it this year, then I do think maybe they're not going to have enough to win the drivers, but we'll see.
Yeah.
No,
well put. I think that you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. I think, with a revisionist view, last year people think, Max has had too much of a buffer by the halfway point of the season. McLaren were never going to pull it off. I think if you are harsher on them, they actually genuinely could have had a chance at that championship if decision making was better. There were definitely more points on the table for them, and who knows, at the end of this year maybe we'll look back and say, they threw away 40-50 points to Verstappen. It might be early in the year, but points count the same now as they count in the final race. Do you know what I mean? So whether they'll learn the lesson, I don't know. It seems to be quite, the last couple of years, it seems to just be McLaren's thing of not settling for second. I mean, settling for second, third is, settling for a double podium each week is pretty good. But if you want to win a drivers' championship, it does feel like
step.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
seem a bit risk averse.
Top step more than you're not. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you're right. I think.
Yeah. Okay. Right, moving on to away from right at the top then. So we mentioned Hajar's quali performance, but he backed it up with a points finish in P8. Really good points for him. Again, talking about the Instagram, I enjoyed a little bit of content of him. Already got points today, don't need to eat these points. I really enjoyed that. He's turning into one of my favourite rookies, I think, Hajar. He seems like a nice lad and a good driver at that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we all kind of fell for him a bit after the first race. We all felt maybe a bit bad, but he's bounced back really well from that. So, he seems like a nice guy, as you say. He comes off very honest in interviews. Seems quite personable. So, I enjoy seeing him. And there's so much more media stuff now. We get to see them in a bit of a different light, I guess.
Personality a bit more. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Again, another rookie, Bierman, P10. Qualified P10, finishing P10. I always think when cars seemingly outperform themselves on the Saturday and qualify higher than maybe they should, to maintain that position on a Sunday is really impressive. So, what's that, a second points finish for him now, if I'm not mistaken? Or is that his first points?
No, I think he scored points already. I think
he's
when with the disqualifications last time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
and
on
he
merit
did
this time at least, points on track.
He had a race compared to Ocon as well.
Yeah, he's got 5 points.
Speaking of,
I mean, he's sitting 12th in the drivers' constructor Behrman.
Yeah,
so,
you
not
take
a bad
that.
start to the
I think
season
you'd rip your hand off to say after 3 races he's sitting in, outside the top half, but above the bottom anyway, in that Haas car. Yeah.
Yeah, the middle third.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The middle third.
It's a respectable place to be.
As a rookie in a Haas, I'd be quite happy with that if I was him. Another driver who should be happy with how their season started, I think, is Alex Albon, P9.
3 consecutive points finishes.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting already to see how he is driving better than Sainz is and how long that might continue. Because you got to think at this point, maybe it's just comfortableness with the car. He's been there for a few years. Do you think there's any... Should we start when should Carlos Sainz, or when should we start to be worried about Carlos Sainz, do you think? I don't think we're getting there yet, but if this keeps up and Albon keeps on out, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to finish ahead of your teammate when you're finishing 14th and he's 15th, but he's scoring points and Sainz isn't scoring as many. Do you think that will be a trend throughout the year? Do you think Sainz will catch up?
I think he'll get his head around it, hopefully.
Yeah. I think he's...
I do think
really
so,
hope
but Albon's underrated in a lot of ways, I think. So I think at the end, I could see Albon still having the edge.
Yeah, but I think he's
Sainz will
playing the
definitely
team game
He's
quite
too good
well.
of a driver.
I think he's been giving good feedback, and I think they're happy with him. I don't think that there's any risk for him. So I think they're happy with the driver lineup, but I think he needs to step it up a bit. But it takes time to get used to these things. So
yeah, exactly. I think he's too good of a driver to at least not be on par with Albon in pretty quick time frame. But again, another example there that how important qualifying might be this year, because if it is so hard to overtake, if you know that your car isn't the fastest to get past people, but you can put together a good Saturday, that is going to guarantee you points. It's looking like, like I said, normally cars in the midfield that maybe outperform where you'd expect them to be on the Saturday, they're not dropping back, they're not getting overtaken to be out of the points, they're actually holding on. So be interesting to see how that develops throughout the year with the development cycle, if people start to focus more on that Saturday pace.
Yeah, Sainz obviously did have a grid penalty after impeding during qualifying, so that did hamper him. He ended up starting in 15th, so
dropped 3.
Pretty cut and dry there, wasn't it? I did see it. It was a can't really complain about that one. It was quite obvious.
It was definitely impeding. It definitely was.
Yeah. One of my predictions, I believe, came true this week as well. Not in the way I expected it, but Yuki made up a few places on the grid. Did he overtake Liam Lawson on track, or was it just in the pits? But either way,
I do believe he overtook him on track.
There you go. So that is
not
in the way I expected. Yeah, we'll have to scrub through the race. That's my bad for not doing the research. But yeah, he made up a few places. He won Drive of the Day, which I don't think going from 14th to 12th quite merits.
No, the Drive of the Day votes have been
win.
So strange this year.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, it is literally popularity content.
Well, I've noticed is he got 23%, and I think a lot of them have been really low percentage. So I think maybe with... I mean, they've been quite split. So maybe with a race like this where, there's no real standout, it's not very exciting. I guess people vote for their favourites, and it was his home race, so maybe
time zone as well. All the Europeans were probably still early for them to be getting their votes in. So maybe that
I was awake, but I didn't vote.
Yeah.
No, well. Right. On that note, then, driver of the day. Els, I'll start with you. Who was your driver of the day? Quite a hard pick.
I'm going to go with Verstappen.
Go ahead.
I'm going Verstappen. I think Hadja had a good weekend in general, but Verstappen, I don't think you can really go any other way but he had a very strong weekend. He had like a champions weekend kind of thing. You know, it wasn't the car, it was him, and it was very much him for the weekend. So yeah, very dominant performance, very good performance, and I'm sure it will be. I know he doesn't necessarily need a morale boost or whatever, but I'm sure it'll be a very feel-good win. So.
It puts the cats amongst the pigeons a bit, I think, on the early narrative that's been developing. I think in terms of setting the narrative for the year, it's a very timely win for him, I'd say. Harry, how about you, driver of the day?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it can't be anyone else for me. It's got to be Max Verstappen. I mean, keeping Red Bull right there in the conversation. Yeah. The track helped, you know, putting it in front of the McLarens, but at the end of the day, you got to give credit where it's due. The strategy kept him there, his driving kept him there, so can't be anyone else.
No, I'd have to agree. To be honest, I don't think you can really look in any other direction. I mean, and especially to think the level of focus you need to have. Like, even though it was hard to get past people, to have your probably two biggest rivals within 2 seconds of you for pretty much the entire race, or for pretty much the entire race, to stay focused for that length of time. Again, like Ellie said, I think it's a drive of a champion, let's say, and we'll see. Well, we'll find out in time how important that drive was, really. But for now, another classic Max Verstappen victory and a well-deserved driver of the day. Honourable mention to Lance Stroll. I think we'd all agree was our least driver of the day. I don't know how to say it. The worst driver of the day. Lance Stroll finishing dead last.
Let's call it. We can just call it the Stroll Award,
or Dunce of the Day.
Dunce of the day. I like that. Dunce of the day. New segment. There you
go. Speaking of segments, moving away from the race, then onto grid news. Obviously, the biggest news of the week really was the Yuki and Liam Lawson news, which I think we'll touch on again. The fact that Verstappen liked a few Instagram posts, cryptically in his own way, kind of made it clear that he wasn't very happy with the decision. Do you think there is a growing amount of evidence that's showing that Verstappen isn't very happy with the direction that Red Bull is going at the minute?
Yeah. Yes. I think he's obviously not happy. I think he's made it clear he likes stability and he likes a fast car. And the stability is not there. And the cohesion within the team is not there, and the car is not super fast. I think if it keeps him in the conversation, maybe that's enough. It's like, at the end of the day, if he only cares about winning, why would he go to
anywhere else?
I mean, I'm saying slower team, but if he can, yes, the car might be slow, but he can put it on pole. He can win races.
Yeah,
maybe that's enough for him. And I think, just in regards to actually being able to leave, if he's dragging a car that, yes, is slow, but he's pushing it, his performance clauses might not come into effect. If he managed to hang on to second or third, he might be stuck there anyway.
With regards to him moving, the whispers are that you're only going to win a championship next year if you have a Mercedes engine. They are the whisperings for the 2026 regulations. So
you heard it here first, everyone.
Toto,
Do you think Toto is doing the
maybe
it's
apparently?
I wonder who is putting those feelers out.
Apparently,
has he been whispering in Max's ear that by any chance? Because it sounds like
his wife works in the FIA to be promoting such rumours.
Yeah. He's whispering to Jos Verstappen and just been like,
apparently it's the same feeling they had before the last period of Mercedes dominance. Apparently it's the same whisperings by the same people in the same way. So that's the feeling, is that you're only going to win in a Mercedes engine next year. So I'm sure McLaren will be happy, and I'm sure Mercedes will be happy. But if Max is listening to those whisperings, and he might not want the Red Bull powertrain partnered with Ford or whatever. We don't know
Yeah,
what that...
maybe that's a good point. Maybe it's a risk he doesn't want to take as well, you know, like if anything, jumping new teams can be, you know, normally seen as a riskier option, but maybe waiting out for his team to come up with their own engine versus Mercedes, who've been in the game for years, maybe that looks like a safer bet in a certain mind space. I don't know.
I think it is a safer bet.
Yeah.
Well, what about this, right? He has proven that he's, you know, the greatest driver of on current form. He's the best driver on the track, right? Why does he...
Easily.
Yeah. He doesn't really need to make a decision. Like, he can stay in Red Bull. He can see what happens in 2026. And then whoever has the fastest car will probably take him anyway. Even if, say, George Russell has won the championship, they'd probably drop George Russell and bring him in.
Right?
Or, you know, if... so I think... Well, maybe whatever driver wins the championship, they drop the other one, and that makes the decision quite clear. The teams need to fight about, you know,
do you think he'd go to McLaren?
Or maybe, you know, Red Bull aren't very good, and he thinks, you know what, that's my time. I'm going to step away.
Do you think McLaren would take him?
Yeah, I think making a jump.
I think anyone would be foolish not to, but I don't think Zach Brown's a massive fan
dynamic.
of him.
Yeah, I just think the dynamic that's building, like, I don't think in 2022 were that the case that Mercedes would have taken him because of the bad blood between Mercedes and Red Bull, and that seems to have faded a bit because Mercedes haven't been quite as much there. Lewis isn't there anymore, so that doesn't seem to be an issue anymore. But, you know, maybe I wouldn't say as much bad blood, but again, I think you get the impression that there is a bit of hostility between, you know, Horner, Max, the McLarens.
I mean, I don't want to use this as the source of all gospel, but in Drive to Survive, I mean, Toto did say it, that he hadn't talked to Max previously because he promised Hamilton he wouldn't. Now that was a conversation. I don't know how they could edit that, or maybe they sort of pushed him to say it, but at the end of the day, Toto said that in an unedited way. So, you know, I think, after the bit of the bad blood, I don't think Hamilton would have wanted, I guess, you know, rightfully so. You don't want someone that fast in the seat next to you, and especially if you maybe hadn't got along that well. But yeah, I think they'd take him in a heartbeat. So we'll see.
Speaking of engines, then, Els, you're more technical than me. So I'll let you explain it maybe. But we've got the V10 proposal being rejected. As our resident technical expert, Els, do you want to talk us through the details?
I would love to. So, the FIA president, Mohammed bin Suleiman, I believe he's trying to increase his popularity before the vote to see, you know, if he's going to be the president for another term. And he was dipping his toe in the water of the V10 engines and trying to drum up support. It had to be backed by, I don't know if it was like all the engine providers or all but one or something like that. So if two engine providers didn't want it, then it couldn't happen. And Honda were basically Honda are only staying in Formula One because of the new engines coming in 2026, and Audi, again, it's a massive reason why they're coming into the sport. These new engines, they're even more hybrid than the current hybrid. So they're the big reasons. Those two are kind of in and staying in the sport, so they were against it, so it couldn't go through anyway. Mercedes weren't too offended by the V10 suggestion, but they wanted there to be a hybrid element. Ferrari and Red Bull, as I say, Red Bull powertrain with the Ford backing, they quite liked the idea. They were backing the V10 proposal, but it's not going to go through. And there's some people are saying, some of the older people are saying it's so nostalgic, and I agree with that. I think when we left the V10 era, we lost some of that sound, some of that iconic. The
sound was amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so like when you think of the sound of Formula One, you think of the sound of a V10. You don't think of these like annoying, high-pitched, squealy engines that we have at the moment. So I'm old and I've been a fan since I was a child, so I do kind of miss the full throttled sound of the, of the old engines. But the new demographic of fans, it's a younger audience. There's fans who have come into it, only ever with these current engines. So there's not as much of a move, I think, from a fan base. Maybe it's not as backed as it is by some people in the FIA. But I don't know what, Harry, you got into the sport.
I mean, I'll as a member of this demographic, I guess, without the nostalgia, personally, I think, it's, I mean, you're going against where I think the whole world is going if you move back to that. I think you're going against the development of the engines, you're going backwards. I think you're losing that technical development, which I think is probably why Honda and Audi, I think, are against it, which you can then use
why they want
road cars.
Exactly.
And I think it's a poor reflection of, as we sort of go towards net zero. I'm not one to be all high and mighty and be like, in theory it's a sport. I don't mind it being petrol and all that stuff, but I just think it's
I agree.
I don't think it's needed personally. And when you have bikes and you put like a spoke to make your bike have a more of a fake motorbike sound, I feel like they got to do something like that. If it's all about sound, just stick a flipping speaker in the back and
if it sounds good,
cars.
it sounds good. Yeah. Exactly.
If electric cars play a sound so we can hear them coming. But I agree what you're saying, that the companies, they want to use this technology in their road cars, hybrid engines that are in road cars. That technology started in Formula One, and Honda, Audi and Mercedes are all against the V10 proposal. As I say, Mercedes wouldn't mind it as long as there was a hybrid element in it, whereas Ferrari and Red Bull, who are not necessarily making as many road cars,
they're not making like
Ferrari,
major road,
Ferrari are making cars, but I don't think people care whether they're like a V8 or a V10, or if they're hybrid. I think people are going for a Ferrari, they want the sound, they don't care about the environmental impact, I guess.
Ferrari aren't making, four-door sedans for mums and dads, are they? So they're not
exactly
worried about, how they can convert it into their road cars,
Yeah, so I think that's why Ferrari and Red Bull were probably backing the idea, because they don't have the financial motive of developing for a road car. So I would say that is why. But I thought it was an interesting proposal, and I think it's interesting because of Harry not thinking of that's for me, when I think of the sound of Formula One, that's what I think of. Whereas even though I'm still, me and Harry were the same age, but it's just interesting depending on when we got into the sport. You have a different relationship
with the sport,
Yeah,
no, I think F1 has done a really good job, especially in the last few years, of modernising itself. The social media side's got a lot better. There's obviously a big push to a younger audience, a wider demographic, and it just feels like a bit of a backward step to go back to the V10s. And again, I just don't think and I'd also say the average F1 fan now maybe isn't as much of a petrol head who's obsessed with cars as they are just a fan of F1 and just F1. I don't think the average F1 fan is watching touring, is watching the Endurance Championship as much as maybe a fan 20 years ago was. It does feel like the F1 fan base isn't as much of a petrol head as they used to be, so I don't think it would mean as much to them on that front. I don't think anyone's as worried about it in that sense, because it just seems like a bit of a backward step to me.
I think it's like more of an old man sport is what it used to
Jeremy
be.
Clarkson,
and now it's
do you know what I mean? It just stinks of power, I'm a man, I eat steaks. I'm a man, I eat steaks. That's the vibe it gives, which
Clarkson would be all over
I think
this.
it's less of an old man sport as it used to be, but it's probably the people voting in the presidential election are probably still mainly old men. So I think that's probably why the motive was there. You got to know your audience, I guess.
Right. Any more grid news of interest, or
no? That's all my technical knowledge.
That's from our F1 reporter Ellie. That's her update for the week.
Yeah.
So
live from
moving
Essex.
on to the most important update, then, in my opinion, is bingo. So obviously, controversial. Lawson dropped. I would use the word dropped for Tsunoda. One of my predictions, at least one rookie is dropped mid-season. I would make the argument that counts. I'm gonna. You can both disagree with me and maybe overrule me, but I'm making the argument that counts as a rookie.
I think dropped. You're dropping that on the pavement. You know, you're walking away. You're dropped. You're like that, you don't want it anymore.
I think they're saving it for later.
I think it's a swap.
Swapped and dropped are different,
Harry.
I agree. Kieran's trying to get him, but
yeah, I think that's going to come true.
If I'm one away from bingo and that's the reason, would you let me have it?
I think you got to wait a bit longer.
No. Actually, something that we haven't mentioned.
I'm only getting ones that are now impossible.
Something that we haven't mentioned this week.
I had all races have DNFs.
Yeah.
Impossible.
So me and Kieran both put that there would be a race where everybody finishes. So we have both been able to tick that one off. But Harry, who put
tick.
all races have DNFs, that is no longer possible.
I said at the time it was a gamble and it was more of a...
It was a space filler.
Almost a wish in a way, there's some kind of action, some kind of thing. It's a space filler. It's impossible. Yeah. I should have gone safer. I should have gone with Yuki overtaking Lawson.
Yeah. So I went Racing
that's
Bull.
Another one of mine that comes in.
Yeah, I said Red Bull / Racing Bull driver swap, so that one has come true. But Kieran, who put rookie,
that was quite a safe bet as well, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. At the time, I had
we
faith.
haven't mentioned this weekend is on the topic of rookies potentially being dropped. Another tough weekend really for Jack Doohan and that crash he had in practice. I think I saw somewhere we're talking about 1.5 million pounds in damages.
Yeah, I heard that.
And we're three races into his career and he's crashed more than I'll ever earn in my entire lifetime probably. So, I still think the season is young and I don't see a way that it doesn't come true. When you've got a driver like Colapinto in the wings. I also heard a rumour, I don't know how true it is, that Helmut Marko actually wanted Colapinto for the Red Bull seat. I think that's just a bit of goss to be fair.
Bit of goss.
But, he himself cost a lot of money though.
There was a period where everyone
was
a bit weird.
He cost Williams 3.6 million in not the longest of time frames.
Yeah, but he's quite big. There's not many South American drivers, and he was quite big. The Argentinians were going crazy.
And he was quite fast.
So he was
fast. He just crashed it up.
He brings money with him, basically.
Yeah, and I think with more time, maybe he would be able to crash less and have more speed. But if he's in a Red Bull that's notoriously difficult to handle, I'm not sure he'd have much hope with that staying out the wall.
That is a good point. But
But the Alpines, the Alpines are on 0 points, so as a team as well, really disaster. And honestly,
we're not big fans of Alpine. We don't like them very much. They're French and they're always disappointing. We talk about perennial rookies. They seem like the perennial rookie team, They always seem like they've got so much potential, right. But they're the Lance Stroll of teams.
When they were Renault, they had that
the Dunce Award goes to.
They had that period where they were quite competitive with McLaren in that slot just below the top, and kind of like we mentioned with the Aston Martin, McLaren have gone one way and Alpine have gone entirely the other since then. It's quite sad to see, really, because they still with the backing of the Renault. Renault's a huge car company, so all the big backing behind them, they're just in absolute disarray, it seems.
That's the French for you.
Right, well, slowly coming towards the end then, looking to next week, looking to Bahrain. Obviously, Japan was the first of 3 races in a row. Quick turnaround to Bahrain. Any early predictions, Ellie?
I shall give my pole and my top 3. I'm going for Lando Norris on pole. Lando Norris wins the race. Max Verstappen in second. Oscar Piastri third. Lance Stroll in last.
Yeah, we should have that on. Who we think is going to finish last season? Harry, do you want to go next?
It's a difficult one. I think this is what I said last week, and I was wrong. But I think the McLaren's top 2. I think I'll go Piastri. I'll go Piastri win. Even though it'll probably be Norris, but I'll go Piastri, Norris, and then I'll go George Russell just to shake it up. Since he snuck a couple podiums. I mean, going against the speed of Verstappen this weekend, but go with that.
All right, over to me. I'm not going to shake it up too much. I think the fastest car clearly is still the McLaren, so I'll say Verstappen in third. I'll go Norris second, Piastri first. There you go. So, and in my last slot, I'll say Jack Doohan. There you go. Any DNF predicted, Elsa? You got any DNS predicted?
Lance Stroll. I'm too harsh on the man, but he's going to be inherit billions, so I think he could take it.
I think he can cry into a silk pillow. Do you know what I mean?
Do you know what? Maybe I'll say we'll get a. This goes against my prediction a little bit. I'm going to say we'll have a DNF from one of the top 4 teams: Ferrari, Mercedes.
Do we count Ferrari as a top 4 team? Because I feel like they're going to be in the battle with Williams. They lost ground this weekend, Williams, but I'm hoping for a strong weekend.
Being a Ferrari fan must be like what being a Spurs fan is at this point.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
God. Well, one of my predictions for next week.
I think we're. I think hopefully we'll get a bit more action on track, and maybe we'll get some spicy overtakes or something, and maybe someone doesn't quite make the corner and crashes out.
There you go, heard it here first. My next prediction, hopefully then, I'm a good luck charm, because this race will be at 4:00, so actually I'll probably watch it live for the first time this year. I'll actually watch a live race.
See, you have to specify 4 p.m. to that. Because there was a 4 a.m. race, and me and Harry both woke up for it. So you have to specify it's at 4 p.m. because 4 a.m. and me and Harry would be there anyway.
Any regular listener knows that a 4 a.m. race, I'll never watch it. It could be the season finale, and it could have been 2021 season finale, and if it was at 4 a.m., I would not be watching it.
Wow,
so dedicated.
I know. Well, moving on to final thoughts then. Harry, do you want to go first? What are your final thoughts from the Japanese Grand Prix?
My final thoughts are it was not a very exciting race, but the thing I will take away from it is Doohan's crash. If he doesn't last the season, I obviously think it's awful when crashes happen, but I do love looking at them afterwards when everyone's safe and okay. That was a majestic crash. I mean, the speed at which he went off and just full slam into the barrier. Probably the most exciting part of the weekend.
Aerodynamic lesson on what happens when you don't close your rear wing in time. Do you know what I
mean?
Yeah. Just a rookie error, but apparently he didn't know he had to close it.
Yeah, I guess because when you press your brakes, it normally closes, but you go in through the first corner, without touching the brakes, so...
Els, do you want to give us your final thoughts?
My final thoughts is I've added an extra new segment for you guys. Woo! I was expecting more energy.
Wait. Say it again.
I've got a new segment for you guys.
Oh my god!
Oh my gosh! Wow, that's crazy.
Another segment. I could. Oh,
that was too much.
How
Tone it down a bit,
crazy
guys.
and how innovative.
So I've obviously had the week off work. I work in a school. 3 weeks off for Easter. Fantastic. So I've been off. Been doing some painting. Colour by numbers. Can't lie.
Amazing.
And I've been listening to BBC Radio 4's You're Dead to Me podcast. Little shout out to them. And at the end of the episode,
friend of the show.
at the end of the episode, Greg quizzes the comedian guest. So there's a comedian guest and there's like a history guest, and they quiz the comedian on how much they've been listening to the history. So I've got a little quiz for you guys. So you're going to play as a team, but Kieran, you can take odd numbers. Harry, you can take even numbered questions.
Yeah, let's do it like that.
And we're competing. You guys can compete against whoever's at home if they want to follow on. Okay, so it's quick fire. Kieran, you're going to start us off. Then Harry will take the next ones, and we'll go back and forth. We're ready. All right. Kieran, how many laps was the Japanese Grand Prix?
54?
No, it was 53.
Oh no! Oh, that's
so
a good
close.
Guess.
Harry, Oscar Piastri celebrated his birthday on Sunday, but how old did he turn?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm going to say 24, 23.
He was 24!
Yeah, there we go. Oh.
For the listener, I definitely didn't cheat and hold up 2 and 4 with my hands on screen.
I missed it.
Did you? I didn't see that.
Oh, Harry didn't even see it. Fair enough. I thought that's why he got it right. Okay.
Number 3. Which driver finished the race with the fastest lap?
Kimi Antonelli.
That is correct.
Nice.
Come on.
Which driver received a 3-place grid penalty after qualifying?
That would be Carlos Sainz.
It was Carlos Sainz. Well done. George Russell finished off the podium for the first time this season, but where did he finish?
Oh, that's a great question. It was a very quiet race.
I don't have my camera on. I can't
got
hold
much
up
screen
the
time.
right answer.
Oh no. I'm going to say he finished 5th.
He did!
Well done.
Yes! Nice.
All right. How many consecutive Japanese Grand Prix has Max Verstappen won?
I think 9. It's 4 or 5. I'm gonna say 5, but it might.
Oh.
It was 4.
4.
Oh. All right, Kieran. For the first time since joining Williams, Albon scored points in 3 consecutive races. What year did he join?
Oh, wow. Oh, great question. Because he had a few years off the grid. I want to say 2022.
It was 2022.
Yes.
Okay, Harry. Which driver became the youngest ever to lead a Grand Prix?
I'm assuming it was Antonelli because he led it for a couple laps, didn't he?
It was Antonelli.
He did.
Right. Sainz was handed a €20,000 fine. Half of it is suspended for arriving late to the national anthem, despite having a doctor's note for receiving treatment for what?
Oh.
I'm not sure the answer, but this is amazing. I didn't realise he had a doctor's note to get out of it.
He had a doctor's note.
A doctor's note. But I'm trying to think what you'd have a doctor's note for that is an excuse for that, but you're still healthy enough to drive a Formula 1 car 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
He was getting physio on his shoulder. I don't know.
A little rash.
It was a stomach issue.
Oh, he was on the toilet. He was having he had a particularly spicy
sushi the night before.
Yeah. All right, Harry, to finish us off, which driver received the first points for? Sorry, I read that wrong. Let me start again. Which driver received his first points for the season?
I assume
I know
it was Hadger. I don't think he scored points last week. Yeah, there we go.
It was. I think that made it 7 out of 10. I don't know if anyone was.
I think we did well.
Yeah.
So if you're listening at home, tell us how many you got
Tell us
right.
what score you got.
In the comments.
Don't lie. We'll know if you lie as well.
Well done. Well, thank you for indulging
thanks, Ellie. That was really good.
Extra
I really enjoyed that
segment.
I enjoyed that. Well, that brings me on then. Is that your final thoughts, Sales? Anything else? I'll let you add something on. Or was that it for you?
No, I think you did all right. You did all right in the quiz. So that was my final thought.
Cool. My final thought is, I hope the racing gets better than that. That's my final thought. I hope we have some more interesting races than that one, because we're in for a long season if not. But I'm sure we will. Okay. So, on that note, it's goodbye from me, Kieran.
Goodbye.
Let's just redo the ending, because Kieran
last time we did individual goodbyes like that. My girlfriend was sat next to me, and she said that was probably one of the most unsexy things I've ever done. So I'm not sure I can do that again.
Yeah, come on, Kieran.
Right. Well, what should I say?
Just say
goodbye. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Remember
thanks
to
for listening,
subscribe,
everybody.
Stuff like that.
Please like. Please subscribe. We're going to keep all that in, so I hope you enjoyed that.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time in Bahrain. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Keep that in, that's quite funny.